to the Floor Show. Joining me now, Fitz-Gerald Group's Keith Fitz-Gerald and Lindsay Piegza. She's a chief economist at Stifel. Thank you both for being here. Keith, let's just say the journal is right. The tech's gone cold. Where do you turn right now?
Well, number one, I don't think the journal's right because not all tech is the same. So even within tech, you got to pivot. Apple is a winner, but it also simultaneously clobbered Meta and it clobbered Google's advertising models. But if you're going to go outside of tech, look to the things that are obvious. For example, Chevron. China, North Korea, and Russia have singularly changed the global supply model for oil. That stock's got a long way to run on top of record earnings it posted this morning.
Yeah, and we're looking at ExxonMobil. What I found interesting is that Chevron, which is not on this this list right here, we should show it, is that it is not one of the leaders right now on the Dow Jones Industrials. But I get it. Energy has looked very strong. Lindsay, to the broader picture, we are exactly, well, I'm not going to count the days. It's next Wednesday. The Federal Reserve is going to come out with its announcement on by how much it's going to raise rates. Full-blown expectation is 75 basis points once again. Tell me what you expect for December now, knowing that core PCE did, tiny bit lower, but not by much.
It's going to be hard for the Fed to change its course and suggest that a lesser course of action is needed or appropriate, given the fact that, as you mentioned, the core PCE did come in slightly below expectations, but it also ticked higher from what we saw the prior month. So core inflation is still moving up in the opposite direction of what the Fed is looking for. And against the backdrop of a stronger than expected uptick in Q3 growth, again, it's going to be very difficult for the Fed to justify changing course from a 75 basis point increase pathway to a smaller 50 basis point increase.
But Lindsay, and this is really important here, if we look at all of the countries that have very recently raised rates. So here's the trend. You have the United Kingdom, which they don't have a meeting in October, but they raised 50 basis points in September. We can put up the board here on all of this. So you've got that. You've got, obviously, the Eurozone. ECB raised rates by 75 basis points yesterday. The U.S. 75 basis points. And then what is that? Oh, Bank of England, 50 basis points. Canada, 50 basis points. And just for fun, we threw in Malawi, which raised by 400 basis points to 18%. Of course, that's an African nation. They're on a whole different metric. But we just thought we should be a little bit grateful before we start complaining about rates, because we're not in an emergency situation, are we?
Well, I think what it shows is that there are central banks around the world that are desperately trying to rein in inflation, but not undermine the growth in their respective domestic economies. And that's the conundrum that the Fed is also facing. But what's different here in the U.S. is that the Fed is still convinced the labor market is on solid footing. And again, with the earlier report we saw this week in Q3 GDP up over 2.5%, if the Fed has been true in its commitment in terms of reinstating price stability, there's nothing to support the notion of a pivot quite yet.
I agree. And so, Keith, people keep saying, oh, maybe this is a sign that the pivot discussion will happen next Wednesday, even though we'll still see a 75 basis point hike. I just don't see it. Do you?
No, I don't. I think for all the reasons Lindsay brilliantly laid out, by the way, I think the only thing that's going to be on the Fed's mind next week is how can they continue to promulgate the illusion. Everybody knows the emperor has no clothes right now, and they stubbornly stick to their arguments despite a mountain of evidence to the contrary that they should, in fact, pause or even pivot.
Wait, what's the mountain? See, I don't think so. I think that we still have high inflation. Yes, it takes a while to work its way through the system. But remember, this was the show a year ago that said, wait a minute, transitory? I don't think so. Inflation is going to be sticky. It's going to be high for quite some time. And we're not economists. We just look at the markets and we have this view, not at 30,000 feet, but very close to the ground.
But that is the key distinction. I was one of the very first people on your show to say this is something wrong with the transitory narrative. The Fed cannot fix this by raising rates as long as the government continues to throw fuel on the fire via its spending. So I think the Fed is misunderstanding rates in labor just the way they misunderstood transitory. If they're going to pause, they need to at least take a look around and see how the job market has changed, why inflation continues to move. It's not necessarily because it's going up on its own violation. It's going up because of lots of supply chains that still exist.
Keith, Lindsay, we will know next Wednesday. And it's going to be one of the most watched. I always say this, but lately, every single Federal Reserve meeting is going to be really, really important until we start to see inflation cool off. But thank you very much. Lindsay, Keith, always a pleasure. All right.
Hi, it's Keith here. Thanks for checking out today's highlight clip. What'd you think? Did I make sense? Is there something you'd like to add? Make sure you leave a comment down below, and of course, click subscribe to keep up right here on YouTube, or sign up for the email newsletter at the link below. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram for my real-time thoughts on markets, analysis, and a whole lot more.